much. Hey everyone, second day of CCC Camp. Here on Plank Stage we have our next talk right now coming up with Rainer. A huge applause for Rainer first of all, our speaker. Rainer will talk about blockchain and what's currently not so good, or what's maybe not so good in the future with blockchain. And yeah, so in the end, we will do a short Q&A, and I will come to you with this microphone so you can, so we have your question on the recording as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So a warm welcome and have fun with Rainer and yeah, blockchain and proof of ignorance.
Okay, hello everyone. I think now the slide will come up soon. That's the magic of technology, I guess. Yes, so this is one slide and it will stay like this. As I've mentioned in the program, this may have some grains of a rant, so you can listen to me and there's nothing to see there. Okay, so blockchain, proof of ignorance. I chose the subtitle title with liberty and justice for some. Maybe you know the book by Glenn Greenwald, I think from 2011, where he analyzed the US system, where in the opposition to the Constitution, where it says with liberty and justice for all, he said, well, the system is gamed, and it's gamed in a way that there's liberty and justice only for some. And I want to make the point that this is basically the same with blockchain. So first to me, my name is Rainer. I'm a computer scientist researcher at the Weizenbaum Institute for the Network Society, and I'm also here with FIF, the Computer Professionals for Peace and Social Responsibility. We're over there in the village. And I've been talking about blockchain for more than 2 years now, and usually about the assumptions and what problems should be solved with this, or what problems cannot be solved with that. If this talk is too witty or too cynical for you, I hope you excuse me. As I said, it's supposed to be a rant. So what I'm talking about is, on an abstract level, a blockchain as an emancipatory and autonomy technology, which gives power back to the users, and especially because it's supposed to take away the intermediaries. I think you all know about that. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have a very critical stance on blockchain right now. So probably my conclusion might not be new to you. But what I try to do is to give you a larger reasoning why this feeling you might have, or why those insights you have from a technical point of view are also valid from a, you could say, maybe more social science point of view. And I will concentrate more on blockchain as emancipatory and less on the supply chain management things, although we can, it's only 1 hour, we can move this topic to the Q&A if you're interested in that, why I think that's not a good idea. So this talk will have 3 parts. First, I want to talk about industrialization and division of labor. Then I want to talk about blockchain and autonomy or emancipation of the end user. And then I will close with some final thoughts, and then we'll have the Q&A session. So first, I want to talk about industrialization and division of labor. Well, welcome. That's my Trojan. Now you have to listen to this. Okay. So let's talk about division of labor. Well, there has been the hunter-gatherer society, agricultural society, let's say maybe from 10,000 years ago, where people started staying in one place, and you know, the hunter-gatherer thing. There was no specialization in the way that we know it now. Certainly there were roles in those societies, in the villages, but not in the sense of how we now in industrial societies, we have like very specific tasks, even maybe broken down to one part of the screw, which is not even the whole screw to make that, for example. So the next step, you could say, is industrialization, where you would say maybe you could see the starting point in the mid of the 18th century, 1750s somehow, where some people would say the start with the steam engine and such. This is usually the tech narrative, but in social science there are also other voices who say industrialization actually came about because of mainly a reorganization of labor. Totaro Nino are writers that wrote about this. So that means you could have had industrialization without changing technology, just because you reorganize and split up labor and then distribute it to different people. So it's, that's just the other end, which would be a totally non-tech narrative. Well, of course, the truth is somewhere in between. It's usually intertwined. People create technology, then technology creates how people interact with each other, and back and forth. So it's as usually, I think, a mix. So, but what changed? Well, at first, I want to look at the workplace. Riese somehow distinguished three dimensions where work changed. First, we had standardization. So we could measure products. We could measure in the physical sense, but also in terms of quality. So we can say, if we know the products are standardized, then you can split this up into a chain, and then you can say, okay, I replace this part, or I use another part because the interfaces are somehow standardized. Then we have specialization. So the creation of products has been broken up into small and smaller steps, from making the whole shoe into making the soles and the top part and the laces and everything. So split it up to specialize and then have maybe higher quality, and then And the third one would be automation. So if you have the specialization, the standardization, you can actually start letting machines doing part of the work. In the case of the steam engine, it was the physical labor that was being replaced. Now we could say maybe now the mental label is being automated as well by the use of computers, but this is not how it started somehow. So obviously society changed because of those kind of production methods. Well, with the specialization, the increased degree of details for each step. If you're Marxian, you would say, oh, this is the start of the alienation of the worker. So if you're not really building, making the shoe and selling it to people, but you're just using the laces, you will never see the happy customer buying the shoe with the beautiful laces. So you're somehow alienated from the things you do, and not getting any social feedback somehow. So hence society became more complex because, of course, you have to organize this kind of labor and this kind of, have the parts, and then you reunify the parts again. You have to, so a special new class, like the bureaucrats, were created somehow, the people with the ties who just only do the organization of labor. And in the same way, the products and artifacts also became more complex. If you look at it now, even shoes have this kind of, the parts where the air is in, and then the other parts where, protects you from rain and whatever. I'm not wearing shoes, so maybe that's okay. The alienation started from people from their products, but also people from each other, and people with larger organizations where people work, where you don't even know really who's the management and all this. So everything gets more and more complicated because of splitting up all the steps. So sociality somehow definitely changed from communities to society. What does that mean? Well, in the community, usually, you have individual exchanges between people who are seen as people. So you have your neighbor is not someone who provides a service to you, but it's your neighbor with their problems, with the whole personality somehow. So this is somehow how villages somehow worked. And if you look around in camp as well, you have the villages where people know each other, and where people, it's not really the exchange of products, but it's more like being there together as a group. But society, in the opposite, is somehow characterized, if you want to follow Tony's on this, by the functional exchange. So if you go to the bakery, you're actually not that much interested in how the life is going of the person selling you the bread. Maybe there might even be just a machine doing this for you. So you're only interested in the functional service that person provides to you. So that's somehow, someone made the shoe and gave it to someone else, and in the end you just go to the shop, here's the money, I want to have the shoe. So the interactions somehow dehumanize and get very functional. So this is kind of the switch from community to society, as you would say. So that means now we have a continuous exposure to incomprehensible artifacts. They might be technical or not. It's the same with, if you think about, as I said, you don't even know, maybe usually you don't even know where your bread comes from. If you go to an organic shop and they show you, this is the bakery, you can even go there. But this is not really how at the moment society largely works. And all these complicated products, if you think about cars, computers, condoms, water, socks, food, in all of those products, we're not experts. So we go to a shop and we buy something, and somehow we have trust that it will not poison us, it will not, hurt us or anything like that. So what also came up as a change is more and more power differences, because not all actors in the society game are equally powerful. Of course, the individual, if you're in a community, if there's a problem, of course, you can somehow deal with the problem or with the person you have a problem with or anything. And if you can't solve it, maybe you go somehow one layer up, but you also know this person. So it's maybe the elderly person in the village or something, but you still know each other. But now with large organizations, if you have a problem, well, you get to the customer complaints and they all think our problems are really important to them and they will get back to us as soon as possible. You don't really know what's happening. You're just interacting with the machine, if so to say. And of course, those large corporations, might it be BMW or Facebook, they are very, very powerful. They define how a Facebook profile looks like somehow, what you can choose, how to present yourself, right? We had this problem with, let's say, gender. If Facebook says there are only 2 genders, well, this is what you could choose in your pull-down menu, right? You can't change how a profile looks like. You can maybe fill in your famous movies or something, but that's so the structuring of society is completely taken over by those organizations. It's not necessarily bad, but I'm just saying there is a difference. So, but how do we deal with the situation of those power indifferences and those largely not understood systems and complex interactions, and also the products we don't really understand? Well, they're basically two approaches. It's like 2 extremes on the scale. I would call the first one the libertarian approach, and the second one is the collectivist approach. Well, the libertarian approach says, I would like to call it the warrior mode. It's kind of, I have my individual responsibility, and I want to have the power to live my life as I please. And if I want something, a product or something changed, then I have to learn about it and change it myself. That's kind of, maybe in this community it would be like, okay, there's surveillance and everything, so what do? Well, you encrypt your emails. This is what you can do. You acquire the knowledge about IT security, about data protection, all this, and then you start doing what you do. And this is kind of the you could say, maybe crypto anarchist view. Encrypt your stuff and your friend's stuff, and then you try to stay out of society. You somehow try to create an enclave where you, in your warrior mindset, can kind of fight society because it's not like you want it to be. The other approach is somehow I would call the collectivist approach. It's somehow, I would say, maybe in computer terms, protected mode. So we have some collective responsibility that the society is somehow shaped in a form that not everyone has to be a warrior all the time. So those power differences have to be somehow counterbalanced. What we made up for this is some kind of the idea, or the most positive idea, like a state where you say, okay, people pay taxes, and then maybe the weaker ones of society, they get some kind of support. The stronger ones have to pay more taxes. It's an ideal world. I know it doesn't work like that. But that's somehow the idea. So that there's a collective system in place that somehow balances again those natural imbalances. So if we have like those 2 modes of operation, now we can think about emancipation and autonomy. It's somehow autonomy, the opposite of heteronomy, which means like to be controlled by other people, but to take your life and to take your decisions into your own hands, to be able to do this. So you want to live freely and independent from coercion, but even from sickness somehow, right? Because we all have different health prepositions. Of course, there's the part of how we live our lives, but of course, there's the part of how we're born and all those things. So in the first case, I mean, the libertarian, if you want to live free, well, then you need the power and the resources. And some critics even say you need the luck. You know, some people are born with passports with more possibilities, and other people just had bad luck with maybe even no passport. So, but this is something you have to deal with yourself, right? The libertarian approach. The second case, the collectivist approach, is somehow the group of people, the society, somehow has to come up with a solution that the society and the environment should somehow be prepared to somehow carry the powerless and restrain the strong ones. Well, some critics say it's only about raising the powerless, but that doesn't really work because the means to distribute are somehow limited. So if you want to support the powerless, of course, you have to take power from someone. So you could even say it's a zero-sum game. So if some people say, well, the problem is not that there are so many poor people, the problem is that there are not enough rich people. Well, with one amount of money, of course, you can't make other people rich without taking the money from somewhere. You know, it's connected. So just an example for this kind of the libertarian approach and the collectivist approach, if you think of maybe you have the freedom of movement in a city with a lot of bridges, like Berlin, for example. Berlin has more bridges than Venice, so let's take Berlin. So the libertarian approach, what would it be? It would be, well, you have to repair the bridges all the time, you have to learn how to swim, maybe you have to buy a boat, maybe a big car that you can actually drive through those areas where the bridges are broken, or maybe you have strong and important friends who somehow arrange things for you. Well, the collectivist approach would be, well, we have to make some organization, create organizations whose responsibility is to take care that those bridges are in good conditions. Because not everyone is a bridge maker, right? So the main target of this organization is that you can actually exercise your freedom for free movement, which is based on the bridges being in a good condition. So that means just to say, well, you have the freedom of movement, the next question should be, but what are the preconditions? Well, if there's a lot of bridges, then the bridges have to be okay. Otherwise, this freedom will never be exercised or only be exercised by the powerful ones, right? So that's kind of the libertarian versus collectivist. So now let's talk about blockchain, finally. Especially when I say blockchain, I include smart contracts and the like. What I will not talk about is permissioned or private blockchains, because to be honest, I as a computer scientist, and probably as you somehow are as well, permission or private blockchains, of course, are databases somehow, but really, really slow and inefficient databases. Because of course, if you say, you know, we want to have a system where everyone can participate, and then you say, okay, let's have it private or permissioned. Again, you have a power entity that decides who plays the game or who doesn't. So I don't want to talk about this. So I want to talk about the public immutable distributed ledger. That's the real thing. This is the only thing I would consider a blockchain. So the promise here now is with blockchain, we want to have money without banks. We want to have consensus without notaries. We want to have a world without intermediaries. And we want to have a society without the need for trust. If you think back to what I said before, this would be the trust into an organization that organization actually takes care of the bridges. We don't want to have those in between things. We want to have, you know, only direct interactions. Exactly. So let's look, for example, at Bitcoin and autonomy for this matter, but this can be used for a lot of blockchain approaches somehow, but it's basically, I would say, still the largest, maybe you can add Ethereum as well, application of this public blockchain, which is actually in use. Well, the idea, and now I make this as a concrete example, but as I say, you can make the abstract view about this yourself. Well, the idea is, well, people should have their own wallets, and it's decentralized. There's no central entity who can meddle with the numbers or anything. And the idea is, well, mining is done by everyone. It's also decentralized. So that means if this will work like that, of course, it's a good idea, because then this is one approach to somehow decrease those power imbalances by just saying there are just no entities who have power. So the system should somehow reorganize itself because everything is centralized, decentralized and stays like that. Well, but of course, if you look at the reality, people use exchanges a lot. A lot of, you know, the majority of people uses exchanges and not have their own wallets. because it's easier to transfer money and everything. But if you look at it, also in the somehow daily use, it's mainly the IT experts and the people who know what they're doing that are having their own wallets in their computers, in their mobile phones. But everyone else actually uses exchanges. And the reality with the mining, well, it's done by some big players. If you think of Bitmain, it's somehow around, depending on the estimations, 60% of the hash power somehow. So the mining itself, it also became centralized because of financial incentives, because of other reasons. But we have again a centralized system because there was no like built-in system to keep it decentralized somehow. Well, at least it is still public, right? So those were kind of the promises. But why are there those problems? Why do people use exchanges? Well, obviously, not everyone is an IT expert. Only those IT experts, they can have wallets. Because if you have a wallet, what does it mean? Well, you have all your valuables on your computer. You have to understand when to update. You have to understand how to secure your machine. And all those things that are necessary around to actually make use of you being able to control the money yourself. And if we look at the mining, for example, this is another point. So even if there would be 100 nodes and 19 nodes, 100 nodes and the system would be technically decentralized, it could be that 19 nodes belong to one person. So at this point, you would have a technically decentralized system, but the power analysis would show you that there is there's a power center. And this cannot be prevented by the technology itself, of course. Right? So so we somehow have a re-centralized world already using like the most broadly used blockchain system. I will not go into details, but could it be otherwise? And so let's pretend it would be otherwise. So people would have their own wallets and everything like that. Well, look at some random cases. So you have an insecure computer, your money was stolen. Well, in the old world, in the banking system, well, if there's anything happening, you know, it's not always the case, but if some of the banks go bankrupt, there is a system in place that somehow says, okay, if one bank goes down, it will be supported by other banks. So the individuals, usually, that's the ideal world, will not use their money because there are mechanisms in place that support comes from other ways. So it's not about the individual now having to suffer that some banks went down. I know, 2008, it's complicated. Okay. So sometimes even if you have credit card fraud and whatever, usually there are some kind of insurances in place, and maybe it's a lot of paperwork, but at this point somehow you get back what you lost, usually. Or if you say, for example, you have made a drunk transfer. I don't know if it happened to you. You're at night, maybe at home, you're drunk on eBay, and suddenly you buy some big machine or something, you know. Or maybe you mistyped a transfer, something like that. Or you were forced to do a certain transfer, you know. Gun on your head, that's the most obvious one, but maybe there are other reasons why you were forced to do this. Or maybe you ordered something and the goods delivered are actually damaged. So how do you like revert a transaction? Well, of course, it's immutable. You can't revert it somehow. So in this case, in all those cases, what I just outlined, the money in this example is gone. So as I say again, the old intermediaries could somehow tap into the jurisdiction system and say, okay, maybe you were forced to do that, so that's why this thing has to be reverted. And so usually if judicial cases come before court, then the whole context will be taken into account. If there has been a contract, the contract is an express of your will. So that means if there's a dispute, then before court, this has to be negotiated. Was it your will and whatever and whatever. If you have, for example, smart contracts, what counts is what the program said. It might not have been what you wanted, but this is what counts. Or maybe you have a pension smart contract and you get like in, I don't know, 50 years or so, you get all your money you saved and everything. Well, what if there's a bug in your smart contract? And I mean, we are all somehow closer or further away from programming. Sometimes I wonder why planes actually work, but if there's something, if you want to write code that should still be working and valid in 50 years, good luck with that. The same would happen if you say, let's, for example, insure a car and let's attach a smart contract. So if your car is damaged, then you get your money back automatically. Well, of course, the first thing the insurance would say is, well, how do we know that the car was actually damaged? Then you would say, well, but there were some sensors, and so this has been reported back into the blockchain. And they would say, yeah, but are the sensors actually okay? We don't trust you. Maybe it was yourself. So maybe can you add some more camera proof that it was not yourself hitting the car? And suddenly you see it's not about, oh, there's a damage, and that's why I get the money back. It's about what happened, who did the damage, what's the whole context of it? Was it really an insurance case, or is it a case of fraud? But this is nothing in the scope of a blockchain that just saves what is. So in all those aspects, what's up with the autonomy? It somehow seems that if you take all this into your hands and you secure your computer and you have everything around, it seems like you're pretty busy all day keeping this system up and running. So it's quite a busy thing to be autonomous, and of course it is, and I'm not saying one should not strive for it. I'm just saying we should reflect on the necessary preconditions to actually be autonomous. So I would say, how free and self-determined can a person be if you're constantly thinking about not being poisoned, not losing your money, not being hacked, not being killed, and whatever, all those things? Well, it seems like quite a lot of regulation and intermediaries have to be around for us actually to be free and autonomous. And that's a pretty interesting thing. If you take the blockchain approach, which says, well, let's get rid of everything around and then you can finally be free. And now it seems like, and of course I'm exaggerating a little bit, now it seems like all this regulation, and we can certainly discuss about this, is actually a precondition for being free. And suddenly it's totally the other way around. Then we're not talking about the individual that tries to be free all the time, but suddenly we're talking about bigger structures creating the preconditions. And we can do this in a democratic way and whatever we want to do this, but this is about societal negotiation, not about coding and not about hacking and not about IT security. It plays a role, but this is not the starting point. And again, I mentioned the examples. Think of condoms, right? If you would have this kind of your responsibility for everything around you, well, right now you go to a shop, you get those, and you're pretty sure, well, according to all we know, you have a certain percentage that things work. But in this kind of blockchain thinking, you would say, well, there's a shelf and you have all kinds of, and it's written on there, this is kind of 60% safe, but it's cheaper. This is kind of 90%, but this is a little bit more expensive. And suddenly you see, wow, now suddenly you have to be a latex expert and a rubber expert to see which one you should actually choose. Well, and if you don't have such a big income, well, bad for you, then you have to buy the cheaper ones, right? So suddenly in all those aspects, you see how the environment somehow shapes how free you can actually be. And it's the same with food, with brakes, with water. It's the same with car and brakes. I'm also not shaking my brakes all the time because there is a system in place that somehow says if your brakes do not meet this minimal standard, you should not go to the road. And this is not about myself, because I can be sure that all the cars around me also had this check. Maybe you don't trust the drivers, but if you're honest to yourself, you trust the drivers. If you're on the motorway or even if you're on the bus, if you would think things will go wrong regularly, you would not take the bus. So you have this kind of trust all the time, everywhere. And now I find it pretty interesting to say, well, let's apply some kind of technology that says, well, let's get rid of all the trust. If you look around you, and maybe today what you will do all day, just make this example to say, what would I now do if I would not trust those people around me? How much effort it would be all the time to secure everything. And this would be, I would consider this a very unfree world. So what I'm just saying, and this is kind of maybe the extreme thesis here we can discuss later on, without those safeguards, autonomy is not possible at all. And it's not possible in any meaningful way. At least not for the majority of people. So that means those blockchain individualization efforts are actually working against the autonomy of everyone who's not an IT expert. And this is a pretty dim vision if you think about it. So that means those who don't happen to have IT as their hobby or their profession, well, you better not be old or weak or busy, have other strengths or anything to guard your values and live your life, right? That's kind of the thing. So what I'm saying somehow, or the thesis I'm putting out here is somehow those kind of individualization efforts of the blockchain are actually somehow a rollback into medieval times, where the things you think about the most is how to secure yourself and how to be in this kind of warrior defending yourself mode all the time. And to make it more imaginative, you could say this is kind of hiding your own money under your pillow and then thinking, okay, where should I hide it that people don't find it? And I would just say this is neither freedom nor autonomy. So now we finally understand why it makes total sense for people to use exchanges. Because if their computer gets hacked, well, okay, it depends on did you store your password and everything, but somehow there is someone taking the job for you to deal with IT security, with all those measurements, to keeping the software up to date, which maybe most of the time they don't, but that's a different problem. But I think you see what I'm saying here. It's not that people are actually lazy to use exchanges. It is just a world that uses division of labor. And what I would say now is that all the talk of tech people about the autonomy by blockchain can only do this because everything else does not work like that. So everything else creates that much free space so they can walk around and say, hey, this, spend your time thinking about IT security, which I don't think this should be a reasonable expectation for a whole society that includes everyone. So, what is blockchain good for? Well, this is a kind of a funny thing. I've been to many blockchain conferences, and it's actually good as a business case. Well, you create a product, and if you find a customer, well, that's good. It doesn't even say if it works, if it's a good solution or anything. This was kind of what I noticed in those more financially oriented blockchain conferences. If you look at the top 5 examples for blockchain use, you could solve all of that with a normal database, but blockchain is a new thing, so you can sell it. And when I question people afterwards in panels, what they said is, yeah, that's true. I don't care about the technology. If you call it something else, my task is to sell it. That's it. The use case is to sell it, to transfer money from the old intermediaries to us. That's the idea. So that means if you find a paying customer, well, you succeeded. And maybe you could also say it's some kind of esoteric thinking where it's psychologically interesting why people actually want to get rid of those intermediaries and be free. So this is more psychologically interesting. And I totally understand the need for that. But what we could say that, for example, Bitcoin, and this would be my interpretation, is not a call for you having wallets ourselves, but it's a call for the democratization of the banking system. And that's a whole different thing. And if we look around what other use cases there are, let's say supply chain management, all those kind of, I can prove whatever, I can prove things to other people. Usually the examples where blockchain is being applied to or is wanted to be applied to, those are usually the societally hard questions. So if people propose to use blockchain for something, it doesn't say something about blockchain, it says something about the person, what that person thinks is the hardest problem, so that the magical blockchain will just save it for them. So as somehow Leon Kaiser phrased it, you could see the blockchain as a Rorschach test. So you say, now we have this nice technology, what do you want to solve with that? And then it's interesting to hear what those people say to you, what they think their biggest problems are. Blockchain will not help, but now we maybe understand better what's wrong in this organization. Okay, and so just as a comment, maybe if we're heading into the discussion somehow, if you want to have somehow supply chain management and you say, oh, let's have a proof where everything came from, well, who puts in the data in those blockchains? Well, of course, it's the suppliers. So the blockchain actually just records what they said would happen, you can still distrust them and say, well, you wrote wrong information in it. What the blockchain just saves is what they said. So again, you see, this is not where it actually helps to apply this, because now you just have a very, very secure place to save allegations and not truth. Okay, and maybe as a last example, I heard it's quite interesting if you look at a lot of situations where a blockchain is actually marketed to work, then usually it's somehow the same as if you would say, well, we'd like to deconstruct this house. Let's drive against the walls with an SUV and eventually the building will collapse. It works, but this is not the technologically best solution. Okay, so now I think we are ready for Q&A, and thanks a lot for listening.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rainer. Thank you. Big applause, please. Yeah. Doesn't look like the blockchain will save us, the planet, or the climate, does it?
Not really, not really.
Looks pretty grim. Okay, so we are ready for our Q&A. If you have questions, I'm coming to you, so please wait when I'm here. So,
hi there. Thanks for the talk and for the critical points. I think, you're absolutely right with your analysis. In one point, we do need to have these kind of organizations, structures, social contracts to safeguard us, and in order to be able to really execute our liberties. But the point is, what blockchain also enables us is to organize these structures in a more democratic way. So if you say Bitcoin is the kind of democratization of the banking system, in principle, any DAO, so a decentralized autonomous organization, can be a democratic or transparent implementation of such a social organization, social contract that acts as one of these safeguards. So for example, you can build a decentralized exchange, you can implement some future key, liquid democracy, voting things, and I think in your talk, in this kind of grim outlook, I feel you underestimated the possibilities of DAOs. They are only starting to get useful for the everyday user because, mostly you have to be a tech expert to also participate, but this is actually changing at the moment right now. For example, day before yesterday, there was DAO Fest in Berlin and people talking about it. So I just wanted to also give that perspective, and I wanted to ask if you could comment.
Yes, sure. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. The point here somehow is, first, maybe I expressed it in the wrong way. I'm not saying that Bitcoin is a democratization of the banking system. What I said is the Bitcoin in itself, it is a criticism that once we democratize the banking system, we can get rid of this kind of things again somehow. And I think you're right. A lot of organizations somehow have listened to all those criticisms. There are still some die-hard fans of this kind of ultra-liberalist approach. But with the DAO, I would like to look into the details of that. The last big DAO that failed crazily with this kind of with those bankruptcy and taking out the funds. The interesting thing was that was because of a coding mistake. So what do you do? What kind of safeguards do you have if your immutability, if the things you wanted to do with the DAO was actually, Weizenbaum said the computer will always do what you told him, but that might not have been what you had in mind. And so this is, if you now say, let's create those DAOs, and they are fully autonomous, but there are ways of to have interrupts and say, okay, let's revoke this transaction and do this again, or all those things. Suddenly, this is not what the blockchain promised, right? So this is something. But I'm happily looking for other approaches. And what I would say as an example, I would not say get away with this technology. If you, for example, pay attention to Faircoin, where they said, okay, let's first create the social environment within which this kind of blockchain approach could actually work. So you have social negotiation about the the trading ratio. You don't have proof of work, but proof of cooperation. So those kind of nodes who will be next calculating. This is done by social negotiation. So this is something, but this is not the pure wisdom anymore. And also, there's maybe something I would like to add. What we should not do is to throw this out the whole window, because somehow many people who do not really understand what blockchain does and what it can and can't do, but it seems like a lot of people now listen and want to change something. So if we know, okay, that person heard blockchain, maybe it means digitalization or something with computers, well, we can also use this wave and just say, yeah, we apply something and this is called blockchain, but it's not public immutable ledger, but it's a different thing. So this is something we can use and to somehow get away from this pure understanding and then get towards a solution that does not neglect that society needs trust, but somehow takes this into account as well. So this is, yeah.
I'm also much more optimistic as the previous person who talked. Thanks. So about the security problem, for example, backing up your key, there are now on Ethereum and soon on Bitcoin smart contract-based wallet where you don't have to back up keys, where you have recovery schemes. So this, how did you told it? Regulators and stuff in place, they will be over time, I hope, implemented in as smart contracts, and ways to also to make them upgradable in a kind of safe way. So I'm still much more optimistic. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for the comment. I think there's one thing we have to think about. If this is being done and implemented, I would still ask who decides how the code should look like. What are the rules? What is seemed to be a good solution for revoking or this kind of recovery scheme? I think there's a lot of politics involved in there. And if this is being done in a democratic way, I think I would also see, okay, maybe there is a way of actually improving something. But this is exactly the complexity that comes back in again to discuss about code. Who has read and write rights to the repositories and stuff like that?
Okay, I'll allow a direct follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
So the fact is that you can choose what smart contract you are participating to. So there are different set of conditions, and you choose yourself which one you opt in, and you can try many.
Okay. Okay, then I do the direct interaction with the direct interaction. I think that's a good idea, but I guess the problem that has to be tackled then is how do you make transparent what are the properties of those different schemes so that non-IT people would actually understand and are able to choose the right one for them. That's the classic problem with investment or all this. I'm not saying it's unsolvable. I'm just saying then this is where the complexity comes back in. And if there's a good solution for that, I wouldn't say it's not possible. I'm just saying it's much more difficult than like throwing out this the code and now you can choose, and that's the solution to choose, because choosing is like transparency. You have to be able to understand what's being presented to you, and then you can actually make a choice. It's like with those informed consent and data protection. No one's is really informed about anything, but still we say, oh, but it's your choice. And now that you consented, we can do everything we wrote in those 160 pages. You know, we have to think about what choice means, and this is as a basic thought for this.
Hey, thanks for your talk. I think I disagree with most of the points you made. Cool. Also, shameless plug, we will host a debate night tomorrow at the 402 Payment Required Village, which will probably cover similar topics. My question is, if Bitcoin or systems like Bitcoin actually reduce the autonomy or are very hard to use, how come that more and more people around the world actually massively benefit from that? People who live in oppressive governments like Venezuela, Iran, China, people who just want to buy the medicine they need, or normal people who just want to save?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. But if you look at, I mean, in Venezuela, this cryptocurrency story was not really successful. I mean, they didn't use their own, but okay, anyway. But the point is, I guess the point is, what I would say is, this might be a temporary fix for a totally different problem, because if you look at this, people in oppressive regimes, of course, they spend their whole day resisting the oppressive regime. And so Bitcoin, like getting into this and trying to get medicine, I totally agree with you. But if the use case is that it works in oppressive regimes, then I would say this is a very narrow and a very justifiable use case, but I don't think it's a general theory of society to say it's being used a lot in oppressive regimes, so it must be a good thing in a free society to use. So if this is part of your fight for freedom, then I would totally agree, and I would also encourage people to use it for those reasons. Totally, yeah.
Well, just as a comment for like ultimately with a blockchain and with smart contracts on it, you have a way to transparently kind of enforce a social contract. Now let's keep bugs and stuff aside and fail safes. Let's say this is to some extent an engineering issue. Then you can use these blockchains to really enforce social contracts. So then that means it's actually a possibility to go beyond oppressive regimes which offer some kind of social contracts to, let's say, to their citizens or some group like a Facebook to their users or whatever. And but this is a way to transparently enforce it. And with a perspective why everything is focused so much on DeFi, decentralized finance, well, ultimately we all have to agree that money is the largest social contract that we have at the moment. And so like, just a final example, 2 months ago, a DAO launched, which is called the DX DAO, which basically governs decentralized exchange protocol. And there, well, basically the DAO itself is on-chain, and the DAO itself has the key or the possibility to change the parameters of that contract. And such a parameter change then needs to be like proposed, and on-chain people that are part of the DAO can then change these parameters. Okay, now it's the question like the reputation holders or the people who can vote, how are these voting rights distributed? Exactly. But this you can also do in a kind of meritocratic way by like you have some initial set of people who somehow are there in the first place, but their incentive is to kind of like distribute voting power to people who actually do things. So they're implementing a meritocracy. And so I think there is possibilities, and I think it's very worthwhile thinking about these things and like trying to let your mind flow free and not only taking the libertarian perspective. I think for taking the socialist perspective on blockchains and decentralized organizations, there's a lot of potential.
Okay, there's one person agreeing. No, and there was also wait. There was also someone with a question up here front.
Where?
Here, you. Yes, exactly. And I want to answer on this. If the idea is somehow to reflect and represent the democratic negotiation process within the whole system, that's an interesting approach. And if all those criticisms I mentioned are taken into account, I have nothing against that. Of course, I would say this is then a good way of like trying to tackle the problem. I'm just saying all the things I mentioned need to be taken into account. And I would be very curious to see if what I presented to formalize this and put this into code, if this is more or less complicated than actually, thinking about society. But I would leave it open, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. Next question.
Thank you so much for your talk. What I already thought about it, for example, the European Central Bank just could print some euros and so on. And I think this could maybe a problem if, for example, the government changes, or for example, someone is elected that does not care so much about the money and so on, and just prints out the money. I think that could be maybe a problem, that that the whole trust is on the central bank for a certain currency, and I think that's a little bit problematic. Maybe for future, maybe it's okay for now because we live in a good society. But how can we guarantee that we always have this good condition in our society? Because things can change.
Yeah. Well, of course, I guess that's the main problem. We can't guarantee that. And that's the point. I mean, in the same way, that's why I argued somehow that Bitcoin is the call for democratization. I mean, the whole idea of the modern understanding of a state is somehow to limit centers of power, to discuss how powerful those entities should be to provide their services, but not more. Of course, we have to discuss where exactly this point is, but in the end, it doesn't matter if you have a group of 5 coders who maintain, the Bitcoin code, or whether you have the central bankers who can decide on this. It's just the same centralization of power we have to prevent somehow. That's why I agree with you, but this is not a technical thing. So, yeah.
I would also agree with a lot of criticism you had, but I would say the conclusion should be a different one. The conclusion should be challenged, accepted, and also like really what you said, like with this wave is going on now. There are so many extremely important experiments that are running, and if the whole thing explodes, shit on it. But it's all this what we learned, and also this scientific approaches, and like the shrapnel. If the rocket explodes, let's take the shrapnel and let's take all the technology and gather the pieces, build something new. You know, like I think there's good experiments running now. So, but we should also be careful. It's a sharp tool, and that's also like for regimes. They have real problems. That's why they need the tools now. We might have this problem in the future, and that might be a tool that is growing that we can use later on. You know, just.
Yeah. Okay, then as a comment to this, I'm totally happy, and I'm always amazed with what kind of ideas people come up, and I usually get this kind of, okay, but let's try and imagine and let go and all this. I get this in conferences as comments quite a lot. What I'm just saying is maybe start a little bit smaller than saying the whole society will work like this and everything will be rearranged. Just to take into account that this technology comes into an existing world where all the systems that are there, they might not be good, but they have a history. There's a reason why a bank works like that. It might not be a good idea, but that was a reaction of previous systems, and that was a reaction to previous systems. So if you want to overhaul the whole system, I'm all up for world revolution. You know, it's a good idea, and if it needs blockchain, I'm in. That's fine. But what I'm just saying is. The blockchain scene should not jump into those societal discussion and say, we know better, and you have been thinking about political theory for the last 200, 2000, whatever years, and we know how the society should be reshaped, and let's have some experiments. All this, I'm just saying, we should have those experiments, but maybe start a bit smaller than leaving people on the way who are maybe not that tech savvy as we are. Okay.
All
right.
right.
For the comments.
I think this pretty much was it. Thank you for your participation. Thanks for your questions. And again, a big applause for Rainer here on stage.